I'm Todd Goldberg. I'm the director of the MFA program at UCR, and I am joined today by my good dear friend, Elizabeth Crane, who is the author of several books, including We Only Know So Much, which came out in 2012 to rave reviews across the country, and then was adapted by Elizabeth, who is actually called Betsy, so I'll start calling her by her favored name in just a moment. It was adapted by Betsy into the movie We Only Know So Much, which a lot of you have already seen, or hopefully all of you have seen. It is now streaming on all the top video services. It's actually been out it was completed a couple years ago. We'll talk about that whole process of an independent film being completed to an independent film actually being seen as part of this. But Elizabeth is generally considered, and I'm going to make her blush here, but it's true, is generally considered one of our finest short story writers in the world. She is the author of 3 short story collections. Her short stories are routinely anthologized and talked about and performed in all sorts of interesting places. But her move into novels has been extraordinarily successful as well, with We Only Know So Much and The History of Great Things. And she's got a new book, a memoir that's kind of a novel. I guess we'll find out about that towards the end of this. It's going to be coming out in a year. We'll get to that. But We Only Know So Much was the first movie that she wrote, and the first movie that has been released. It won a bunch of awards on the independent film circuit and is now getting great reviews on the internet machines. Elizabeth Crane is coming to us from Newburgh, New York, where it is 9 o'clock, officially 1 hour after her bedtime. So ladies and gentlemen, Elizabeth Crane, thank you so much for coming, Betsy. We really appreciate it.
Correct. That is correct.
Thanks for coming.
I like to bring the people what they want.
So I have lots of questions for you that I'm going to pretend I don't already know the answers to. And I'm sure that you have lots of interesting things to say. So let's first talk about the book, if we can. So the book We Only Know So Much came out in 2012. So you finished writing that book when?
2011? 2010?
So this,
I think I wrote 2010, 2011.
So this book and this story of the Copeland family has been part of your life now for a decade.
That is true, yes.
What's it been like keeping these characters in your head all this time?
Well, that's an interesting question. You know, they might not be had it not been for the film, because I've moved on. I've written how many other books since then, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's actually been interesting. I guess probably in part because a couple of the characters are based on people in my family.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you see actors depicting your dad and your grandmother,
right,
repeatedly,
right,
because I've seen it many times, and I was on set when they filmed. It's it doesn't get less weird.
Right. Well, last night when I was watching the movie again with my wife Wendy, a couple minutes into it, we both sort of commented, you know, Jean Triplehorn is a pretty good Elizabeth Crane. But I don't know if Jean Triplehorn, if the character, of course, is supposed to be based on you, and I assume all fiction is made up. But if, in fact, she is loosely based on a character known as Elizabeth Crane.
She's not.
Okay.
She's not. Although I will say, only the grandfather and the grandmother were based on members of my family. I will say, though, that the first time I went, if we're going to just be real.
We should. We've got all these 51 nice people want reality.
That I went to a screening after my marriage had fallen apart, and I hadn't seen it in a couple of years, which, by the way, did not fall apart because I cheated on my husband, because I did not.
That's good.
I have a whole other story. I do have a nice little story, though, about being at an event where a woman a patron of the arts sat next to me and was absolutely convinced that it was me.
Oh gosh.
And I could, and she was getting increasingly drunk, and I could tell that she refused to believe that I hadn't written this from experience, because I guess it was believable enough to her. And then she was really disappointed, because I think she kind of wanted to share her experiences with me. It was
right.
really a big group.
Well,
but in any case, I was a very seeing this film where this marriage is in trouble after my marriage had just ended was upsetting in a whole new weird way. Like
right.
I wrote that years ago.
Right. And not that there's any similar parallels necessarily, except for the end of love, but the challenging thing that that viewers will find out if they go back and read the book, which they absolutely should. There's significant differences between the book and the movie.
For sure.
But the book is written in a very unusual way. It's written in the first person plural point of view, which is the we voice, for those of you who are not familiar with that. And so to translate a book that's written in the first person plural into just a standard film, how did you go about that process, and how difficult was it adapting your own work into some other form?
Well, so it's a multi-part question, right? I co-wrote it with the director, Donna Lardner Ward, who's a good friend of mine. He's made several movies before. He's worked on several series before. I have, previous to this, dabbled and always thought, I thought from the time I was in college that I was going to be a screenwriter, and then I discovered short stories, and I was like, oh, that's my thing. But I had tried and hadn't written anything I really liked, and then I started writing fiction. But so when the time came, all these decades later, to do this with Donnie, we sat down, and there was a whole, he pulled apart the whole book, scene by scene, basically, and made like a chart with all of the characters and all the scenes that they overlapped in, and and then we talked a lot, and then we ended up talking a lot about what we could use, what we couldn't use, what we would change, whatever. But the thing about the narrator, because we did talk about a lot of things, but I think in the end, probably the reason that we didn't try to get more, there's more than one reason. I think budget was something to do with it, because I think we could have, if we'd had a bigger budget, we could have maybe come up with some super weirdly creative way to incorporate that. But voiceovers, and there is a voiceover in the movie, but it's right. Basically, it's not a traditional voiceover. It's the character of Jean is talking from her group therapy sessions,
right?
And that that usually like overlaps into her group therapy.
And so, of course, you use the device too of sort of the chapter breaks.
And there's the little chapter breaks, right? But we ultimately, we just couldn't find a way to use that voice in a voiceover that would work.
Right.
And so, in the end, that was sacrificed. And I think we just were like, okay, let's just really go for who these characters are, and keep the story straightforward.
You mentioned a moment ago the budget. So this is a super independent film. It's distributed by Lionsgate, which is great, which means it gets out there really widely now. But when you were shooting it, you didn't have that huge distribution deal in front of you. So you made this movie on a really small budget. Can you tell us sort of roundabout how much it cost?
The initial plan for the budget was
$125,000. My gosh.
Yeah. And he'd done this before, so he knew that he could do it. and then ultimately in post and everything, I think maybe another, it might have been closer to 200, that the money was given to them by Red Hour Films, who produced the film. But yeah, you know, part of the reason why he was attracted to this book was that it was a really simple, at core, it's a family story.
Right.
He knew that he understood what he could do with a small budget, because it takes place in a house and a grocery store and, you know, a couple of other places, basically.
And the cast that you got, so an actor of the caliber of Jeanne Tripplehorn would normally get your entire budget to appear in a movie. So was this a case of an existing relationship where someone was able to call her and say, hey, we got 3 weeks of shooting for the super independent film based on a great book. Are you interested?
Not exactly. So she was one of the first people. So Red Hour Films is run by Ben Stiller.
Mm-hmm.
And Ben Stiller, when he read the script, had her in mind. And he gave it to her to read, and she loved it.
Oh, wow.
And she loved the book.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was basically that. I mean, that there are a lot of kind of the minor players in the film. There are a lot of cameos by friends of Donnie's.
Mm-hmm.
But you know, we kind of knew that this would be a project that actors would want to come into because there was some fun stuff to do,
mm-hmm.
you know?
And obviously some great and weighty dialogue. I mean, I think the wonderful thing about watching the movie, having read the book, is seeing how much you stole from yourself, of course. I mean, it's an extraordinary...
Yeah, no, for sure.
It's an extraordinarily literary movie. I mean, you know, any movie that takes place with where there's book club scenes is, I think, by its nature, you know, extraordinarily literary. But you know, there's all the Moby Dick stuff.
Right.
You know, these are people that are in fact seemingly living in sort of a domestic novel. You know, all these things that are
Totally.
happening to them. And so I'm wondering if, you know, when you were talking to the actors, did they come to you and say, hey, because it's different when you've written the script and you've written the book. I mean, you are the brain of this entire thing. Did the actors come to you and say, what were you thinking when you wrote this? What were you thinking about this? Or were you not involved so much in that process?
No, they didn't talk to me about that so much. I think actually they came to me, the two leads were really enthusiastic about the book.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think there was probably enough for them to source in there to use as actors.
Right.
I was certainly available. I was on set for the whole shoot. And you know, basically, like in case they needed reshoots or whatever, which we did like one little rewrite while I was there. But basically, it was just, you know, Donnie knew that like it would be a great experience for me to have, and so he was like, you know, come on by. But oh yeah, right, and I was in it. But
right, yeah. So those of you that are sitting in the audience, you might recognize our guest today from her scintillating role as the book club leader. In the first scene, she sat on this side, and then in the second scene, she sat on that side.
Am I allowed to swear on this?
You absolutely may swear on this.
So when that scene came, and I was in it basically because, and I was given lines because it was a low budget film, and
right.
Like there were little cameos from a producer and a PA and this and that here and there. Most of those were extras, but I got lines, and my goal as an actor was just not to fuck up the lines that I wrote. That was my entire impetus from the performance that I brought to the screen.
You brought it. you brought the full power of the one line that you said. I thought that was good. I thought that your best part was, and I noticed this the first time I saw the movie, and then I noticed again last night when we were watching it, and when my wife pointed out as well. You were wearing your own shoes. You saved on wardrobe by wearing your own shoes. So that was a nice touch.
But I was wearing a pullover sweater. For the astute viewers will note that I was wearing a pullover sweater.
And not a cardigan. So
let's just talk about acting. Can we?
You did some method shit right there. That was incredible.
That's how I got into character.
So you shot the film in the Hamptons, is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
And how long was the shoot?
Little less than 3 weeks.
Oh, wow. And tell us a little bit about that experience. Most people, I think, in our audience probably know that you don't typically shoot a movie in order. This was not shot in order, I would presume.
No.
So tell us, what was the most challenging scene to shoot, and what was the most emotional moment for you just sitting there and watching it?
Yeah, good question. So, wait, what was the first part of the question? I got the emotional moment.
The most challenging scene to shoot.
Oh, challenging scenes to shoot. That's interesting. I'm trying to remember. I mean, I will say this, that the house that we shot in, which is sadly no longer standing because people tear down these amazing old houses and
oh my gosh,
ginormous new houses. Yeah, so that was off the table 4 years later when we had reshoots. So we're like, okay, we're not doing it in that house.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, and it was the coolest house, and it had the same decor that had been there for 40 years. So it was like there was one room that had like elephant wallpaper and weird thing. Yeah. Anyway, so it was a little bit challenging shooting in the house because it was an old house. And it had a number of rooms, but none of them were big enough to really accommodate a crew and a cast. So, those of us who were not in those scenes or were part of the crew would just be like sort of trying really hard not to get in anybody's way.
Right. Let me just stop you just for 1 sec. Hey, I see Joy and Alan that you have your hand up. If you have a question, down there at the bottom, you'll see a little button that says Q&A. Type your question into there, and at the conclusion of our talk, we'll start answering some of the questions. I forgot to announce that at the top of the show. And so what was the most emotional thing for you, Betsy?
Yeah, so my little emotional moment on set was actually right prior to shooting a scene. I don't even know if it was I don't even think it was a particularly emotional scene, but it was a scene with the grandfather who was based on my dad. Mm-hmm. And I hadn't shown them the pictures of my dad or, talked to them about that. Whatever they took either from the book or whatever, but my dad had Parkinson's and there are certain, like, there's a shuffle, the character walks mm-hmm. with my dad walked with a shuffle, and he wore suspenders and kind of like a tweed jacket, and they had Loudon Wainwright dressed up just almost exactly like my dad.
Oh, wow.
And he like passed by me. I hadn't met him yet. And he I have goosebumps even still remembering it. Like, I mean, my dad was long gone when this was made. And it's like, he passed by me in the house and I was just like, and then I felt like doubly embarrassed because he was Loudon Wainwright. And I wanted to gush, like how, tell him all of my sad
singer-songwriter stories. Well, he was so good as the grandfather in it, and the scene where the daughter has to clean up after him. It's a really hard scene to watch for, I'm sure, all of us that are viewing this right now, or if you haven't experienced it, you're going to experience it. Something like that with someone that you love, that moment when someone that you care about deeply becomes, almost infantile in your hands. For me, it was with my mom, and then later it was with my wife's grandfather. These are the hard things that we experience as human beings, and it's impossible to watch that scene and not be transported to that experience. And I found the daughter's reaction to it, pretty realistic. Like, all I ever wanted to do after that was also run into my room and bury my face in a tiger striped pillow. Can you talk to us about the logistics of writing that scene, and then also of shooting that scene? Because it's actually a very complex little scene that shows up on our screen. I know you weren't the director, obviously, but I'm just curious how much that you put in and how much of it was the actors themselves.
When we wrote it, we would each write a scene. Basically, we had this little rhythm going on where we would each write a scene and then kind of trade them at the end of the day and tidy them up however we wanted, trade them back, and then put it together. But the characters, the characters that I was kind of doing more, like focusing more on, were Priscilla, the daughter, the dad, and Otis, I think. Mm-hmm. It's hard for me to remember now, but I definitely remember I worked on Priscilla a lot. And so that, that was a scene that definitely came out of the book. And was an experience that was very similar to one that I had with my dad. Mm-hmm. My stepmom took care of my dad and my grandmother. They were all living in my dad and in the real life version, my dad and my stepmom were in their 60s. A good bit older than this couple, and nothing like them. No. When they moved in to take care of my grandparents, who were in their late 80s, mm-hmm. And fairly healthy, and then they ended up living to be 100 and 104. And my grandmother actually was in fairly good health for the last couple of years of her life were not as good, but she was in good health, and my dad was not. Right. So it was my stepmom who was really caring for everyone in the house. And but there was one occasion when Lois, I was there for, over the summer. My stepmom was somewhere. And so I spent the night with Dad, and a similar, kind of thing happened. And I remember how, I felt like way worse for him than for me, right. And, right. But in grafting that experience onto Priscilla, who has been, and, there are things that are developed in the book that weren't as much in the film, but Priscilla is bitchy, mm-hmm. and her bitchiness gets a lot of space in the book, and it's actually that experience that, she was close with her grandfather. Her grandfather's really the only one that she was ever close with in the house, but it was that experience that kind of pushed Priscilla's character to grow, right. to have this,
Well, she has that great line, though, when she's walking up the stairs, and she says, I live here with basically every single person who's ever been in my family, which is in the book, too, if I remember correctly. Yeah. It's an extraordinarily funny line, and I'll always laugh at that.
She is fun to write.
And, she provides a lot of the comic relief. Essentially the inciting incident of both the book and the movie is something that I've long been sort of fascinated by, surrounded by people who sometimes make bad choices, which is like what has happened to this woman when her lover, she's in an extramarital affair with this man, and he kills himself. You know, it's a great device, by the way. But you know, that's one of those things that you think like, oh, right, like if you're involved in some sort of illicit extramarital affair and that person dies or kills themselves, you can't really mourn in the appropriate way if you want to continue the secret of your life. Yeah. So I was fascinated by that, and I'm curious where that came from. Like, had you had this same maudlin? Had you and I talked about it? Had you had this same maudlin thought?
Well, so no, I mean, like see if this will answer your question. So originally, when I wrote this book, it was going to be a short story, and it was going to be. It was almost going to be several short stories. Like each of the 4 younger characters, the 2 parents and the 2 kids, were characters that I had ideas for. And I scribbled on pieces of paper, and I was like, well, all right, maybe I'll make them a family, see what happens. And the mother, there were 2 things about the mother. One was that she had this bitchy daughter. Like, what would you do if your daughter was a bitch? But the other thing was that it was after David Foster Wallace had killed himself. And I was just kind of like, what is that? What is that like to walk in and find your husband hanging? Right. You know? And so, but she was already married. So I had to kind of figure out like, I
mean, it's a great how do I unscrew this problem? You know, I mean, it's one of those things that as writers, right? Like when you come up on an idea like that, you're like, oh God, like that's gold. Like I have no idea.
I never think, I don't know, but I wanted to have this family where nobody communicated with each other.
Right.
That they would, if they had conversations with people, it would only be outside of the house. And this was my first novel, so it was suggested to me about 100 pages in, like, you might want to have these people talk to each other. So then I had to figure out how to have them talk to each other without communicating well. I think the note that my agent gave me was, this is great, but like you might want to have a scene.
Right. Yeah, that's good advice for any of you that are out there that are watching this that are aspiring writers. Have your characters do things and have them do them in a scene. That's what you get from Professor Goldberg.
Which is the note I give a million
and
times.
Professor Crane. Have your characters do something. Let's talk a bit about Otis for a second, both the character and the actor, and then I have just a couple more questions, and we'll turn it over to the audience to see. We got a bunch of questions. So the character of Otis, really, he's great because he reveals secrets without ever trying. You know, he's just a kid. And so he's a little bit of a wild card because you never know precisely what he's going to say in the scene that might reveal a secret. And so I love him, and I love a precocious kid in books and in movies because that's how I viewed myself, though it probably wasn't that true. So
did you do all your math homework at the beginning of the year, Todd?
No, I still haven't done my math homework. And then, of course, for those of you who saw the movie recently, you might have seen the kid and thought, oh, I know I recognize him from somewhere, but I'm not sure where. The kid is now wildly famous for being in the TV show Stranger Things. He's Mike in Stranger Things. He is the star of Stranger Things.
No, he's Will.
Will. I'm sorry, Will.
Yeah.
He's the star of Stranger Things. But
he's the kid that goes missing.
You got him before he was a star, and then the movie came out.
We are star makers, Todd.
And of course, the unusual thing is that, and we'll get to the release problems, or not problems, but how indie films get released. This movie is released, and it's like a time machine because anyone who saw Stranger Things saw that poor kid go through puberty on television in real time. He grew 7 inches in season 6 or whatever it was of Stranger Things.
Also, another reason why when we ended up doing reshoots, like reshoots, new scenes that we wrote basically 3 years later, we could not use him.
Because he was
could not,
6'4". So tell us a little bit about the impetus of that character, and then let us know what that beautiful young child was like. What's his? I forgot his name. I have it listed
Noah
here.
Schnapp.
Yes, tell us about Noah in real life. Also, the big star.
Well,
it's like having Sean Cassidy in your movie.
I didn't do the casting. I was privy to some of the casting. Donnie was very generous, in sending me he would send me the final like 3 or 4 people that he was considering for any given part, which like writers are almost never going to get to do, but such are the bonuses of making films with your friends on a shoestring budget. The impetus for the character was basically just, I remember hearing someone talk about how they did all their math homework at the beginning of the year. And I just thought, like, who is that kid? And it went from there.
And makes its own crossword puzzles.
What?
The crossword puzzles, that was oddly reminiscent for me, because when I was a kid.
Well, I used to try.
Well, I didn't make crossword puzzles, but I was profoundly dyslexic. And I used this in a story once years ago. So I had this weird relationship with letters because I didn't really see them correctly. And so I started this sort of like strange little language where I had assigned letters to be like words or images. It's maybe sort of a kind of aphasia now that I think about it in my adult mind. But I couldn't read. And so I would say, oh, Q means this or R means this. And so like that level of sort of OCD-ness with something, like this thing that you're into that everyone else would think is really, really strange, that I liked a lot.
Well, thank you. Thank you. I don't know. He was, I'm sure that at some juncture, he became like the child of these people, and he's a little bit weirder in the book too than he is in the movie. He's kind of just more sweet, and in the book he's a little more odd. He's a little more
little man Tate in the book.
Yes, definitely. And then Katerina is also like super, there's a genuine connection between the two. Weird for a brief moment,
right?
They have a connection. But he's so Noah is he's a sweet kid. I mean, he was a sweet kid. Now he just seems like a sweet teenager. I get a lot of weird people following. I've had for years on Instagram. His fans will follow me because like to try to get to him, basically.
Right. Oh, that's strange.
Because he follows me.
Right. Oh, that's weird. So when Stranger Things took off, you'd already completed the film at this point, and all of a sudden he became this touchstone of American culture. That must have been a disassociating experience.
These things happen. I've been in the movies. I've been around Hollywood for 40 years. Like, these things happen.
But it's neat to sort of see this kid that we think we know from this other thing in his early stages. I mean, obviously he brings a lot to the screen. He's a very magnetic performer even as a child.
He's so good in it. I mean that like when he's on the bus. There's scenes with the mom that are so good, and he's on the bus with Katerina, and he like looks down at his little notebook, and he's like smiles the like tiniest little smile, like it's not like overblown. It's just like, oh, she likes me, like, but he's really like keeping it in, and then like he reacts to the mom. But Dad's name is Gordon.
Yeah,
Like,
it's a great moment, and he was perfect. So one last question for me, and then we'll start taking the questions that you guys have. So if you have more questions, folks, just go ahead and type them in the Q&A section, and then in a moment we'll be joined here on screen by the lovely and talented Agam Patel, who will read your answers or your questions. We'll try and answer as many as we possibly can. I know some folks also emailed questions. We'll try and get to as many of those as possible too. So the movie was finished in 2016. Is that correct?
No.
17?
Wait.
We're in 2020.
Yes, 2016. Yes, that's correct. Absolutely correct. Yes.
So you finished it in 2016. It hit the festival circuit in 2018.
No, Todd, 2014.
You finished the movie in 2014.
Yes, because we moved from Brooklyn to Newburgh. I've been here 6 years. We moved from Brooklyn to Newburgh while I was out on Long Island shooting, basically.
Okay.
So as soon as I was done, I just came up here.
So you finished shooting in 2014.
Yeah.
When was the movie actually done?
Okay, so let's see. It came out in 2018.
Well, that's when it debuted in the festivals, 2018.
Right, that's when, right. So, yeah, that's what I'm meaning to say. It was done, so it was done before, 2017, 2018, basically. Okay. It was done shortly before. They were tidying it up right before those festivals.
So for a film with a micro budget like this, you finish it in 2014, and it takes 4 years before it hits the festivals.
Because we did some of those reshoots that were like 2 years later because we had trouble getting this cast member or that cast member at the same time, or getting schedules and locations and things, because everybody was all spread out.
I mean, and this is the calamity that can happen in independent film. So if you're shooting a movie at Universal and your budget's $100 million and you need to bring someone back in for reshoots or whatever, you can CGI that house,
right,
and shoot them wherever you want, and you're done like that. Or if you need to, redo the dialogue or whatever it might be, or you get a test response and something doesn't play right, but you don't have that luxury in independent film. You got to work around that. So that period of 4 years between finishing filming and actually coming out, was it constant stuff that was happening? Or is it like, okay, we're going to try and start submitting it in 2017 to get into 2018 festivals? It
was not actually constantly. I mean, I do think that Donnie was like, he always had something in motion, and he had editors working on the edits. Like he started editing shortly after we wrapped. And then, he would make progress and get to a certain point, and then he would say, okay, we would have a screening or something, and the producers would say it needs a little bit of this or blah blah blah. Right. And we wrote a couple more scenes, and then we had that problem of corralling the actors that were needed for those scenes, scheduling that. So, but also I was going to say, he was having to make a living too.
Right.
So he also, had miscellaneous jobs in there that prevented him from being able to do certain parts of it.
So it hits the festivals in 2018, and then it gets released for the actual wide world to see in February of this year, right? February of 2020. So 6 years since the movie finished filming, it debuts right on the cusp of a vast global pandemic, which is great because people are at home and they have time to watch. But that's an amazing sort of story of perseverance, for an independent film, it might take a long time. And then you get distribution from Lionsgate, which is a huge multinational company that's going to get you. If you need to get under your blanket there, Betsy, please do.
I'm sitting on the floor. That's why.
Now you're on every single streaming service on the planet. That must be finally like a pretty gratifying experience. But is it weird because emotionally it seems like a distant thing from the actual experience?
Well, so I think, yes, a little bit. I think the thing that it was always going to be, the idea was always that it was going to be streaming in one fashion or another. That was his intention when he made it. And so it is a sort of like, I remember, and even in February, it's kind of like, okay, my movie's out. I'm in my house. I'm not going to, but in 2018, when it was on the festival circuit, I went to 3 or 4 festivals. There was 1 or 2 that I didn't get to go to. And so I had that experience at that time.
So
it was pretty incredible, honestly.
What was it like the first time, and then we'll take the questions. What was it like the first time you're in an audience, sitting there, watching your movie with complete strangers?
Well, there were a lot of people who were not strangers. I was sitting next to Gene at the very first, at the premiere. And a lot of the cast and crew, but it was still a packed room of yes, there were many strangers. It was amazing because you can absolutely, I had this experience when they did a play based on my first book, but I've had actor friends tell me like, oh, this was a good audience, this is a bad audience, and I would always think, how can you tell the difference? And you get a little bit of this from doing readings over the years. When someone's group is responsive or not responsive. There's a vibe.
Right.
But it was very apparent to me that the response was as one hoped. They were laughing a lot. You knew they were crying. I was very clear that there were quite a few people in the audience crying. And I couldn't set out to make somebody cry if I tried.
Oh, I
really did not.
I could.
No. I did not know that would happen. But I cried.
Right.
But my husband had just moved out. So that was part of it, for sure.
You were going through your own shit. Right. We get it.
Yes. But, it was really, it was pretty great. It was pretty great.
All right. Well, we have a bunch of questions, so let's bring onto the screen. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm proud to introduce to you the Associate Director of the UCR MFA program, Agam Patel. Hello, Agam Patel.
Hi. Hi, everyone. Nice to see all of you.
Agam has been collecting your questions. Agam, who do we have with a question? Fire away.
All right. So the first one comes to you from our friend and alum, Melissa Henderson. It says, Betsy, super curious about how you transitioned the awesomely voicey narration into the film format.
Well, I think we mostly kind of covered that. I mean, it really, I think we lost that, the overarching voice of the narrator, of the we narrator, and just tried to really stick with keeping the characters. There's a lot that's lost because it's very close on the characters too. There's like tons and tons of internal stuff. But we really had to like, what can we do to convey those thoughts without having them say them? Or, how do we show them going through this without you seeing those obsessive thoughts that are in Gene's head or, whoever, or Gordon's or whatever,
A lot of it is helped by that giant tree. As many shots as possible on the giant tree, I think, solved a lot of the problems. Is that correct?
Yes, just like pan to the tree.
Well, I mean, I said it as a joke, but it's sort of true. Like the tree obviously becomes a symbol for something larger.
The tree of life.
The tree of life, the family tree, the connections that we make, the flowering of love, all that stuff. So I think you get that. And I mean, you also have great actors who have extraordinarily expressive faces that are doing a lot of the heavy lifting. We haven't even mentioned the boyfriend Donald
Logue.
Logue, yeah, who's a fantastic actor, great in the TV show
He's
Terriers
so good.
that my friend Chief Sutton made. But him as the lover was really good because he conveys a lot just by taking off his glasses and slipping them in his pocket.
Yes, and he's super smart, that guy.
Mm-hmm.
He's crazy smart, and he's very intense. And I had to act opposite him. And I actually did have to act because he says something that's kind of funny.
Right.
And I'm not supposed to think it's funny.
Right.
And it was hard to, yeah.
You've not been laughing at my jokes for like 15 years. It should have been super easy. Intense, smart guy who's funny, but I'm not going to laugh. Oh, it's like Todd.
Yeah, but this is meta though, Todd. I gave him the funny lines to say.
That is meta.
And he's funny.
Right.
So like I'm not laughing at myself.
That's even harder. Yeah.
Yeah.
I understand. All right. Next question, Agam. Who do we have?
All right. The next question comes to us from Eleanor Cooper. She wants to know the outcome of the husband. Was the outcome of the husband and the college friend ever explained?
Oh.
Was the outcome of the
husband
in the
as in does he ever remember Trudy?
Oh yeah. No, he never does. But I think he ultimately comes, like he goes through his arc, if you will,
right,
of kind of realizing what's really going on with him, and that it has nothing to do with her. So no, he doesn't ever.
He never does remember
actually remembering her.
The whole subplot did like have me thinking like, well, how much have I forgotten? And I try just not to remember a great old quote, like Mitchke said it or something like, "You'll never know how much you've forgotten." But I don't think I could forget someone I dated for 7 months. But
you know the story. You know how that story came about.
No,
I've surely told you that.
I don't think so.
Someone that I dated for 6 months to a year, who pursued me very relentlessly, almost 30 years ago, I ran into him at the LA Times Festival.
Oh, yes, I do know this story.
And he didn't remember me. And had it been anyone else, I would have been taking it personally. But this guy was nuts. And
right.
So I was just like, well, that stands to reason. But I remember leaving there and thinking, like, if someone came up to me and told me that they had dated me for 6 months, I would definitely think I was losing my mind.
Right. Now that person is no longer.
And so that was very easy to figure out Gordon's obsession from there.
This person is no longer with us now, too, correct?
He's no longer with us.
Okay. So this is, we won't say who this person was, but he was an actor. And I once tried to explain to my lovely wife who this actor was. And I said, you know this guy, he plays the asshole and everything. And Wendy was like, oh, yeah, okay, yeah. I didn't even have to say his name, and she knew exactly who I was talking about. And he dated Betsy for 6 months. 6 lost cocaine months, apparently. But so, so it's an interesting thing, the question that she presents, because you don't ever solve it. And I think, of course, the subtext of that is, well, the issue that he was going through, like, does he have Alzheimer's himself, or what are his memory problems? They become moot in the larger reality of the story because he's lost sense of everything around him. He's lost all of his reality and emotion and all of his passion, and so that he can't remember this woman he dated is endemic of the fact that he lost all of his passion 1,000 years ago.
That's right.
And then there's all of his great naked paintings of Jean Triplehorn.
Yeah, Jean was a little bit like, oh.
Yeah, Me and Gene. All right, next question to go on. What do we got?
All right, this question came to us via our email. It comes from Elizabeth Erickson, our partner. This movie is so moving, especially the family dynamics. What or who inspired you to write a book that became a movie about memory loss?
Well, a little bit. Some of those things have come to the discussion, but I will say that my watching my dad's cognitive changes when he had Parkinson's was painful and interesting. It was interesting because you never really knew what he didn't remember, but in his case, his interests had changed, which is definitely reflected in the character of Theo. He was in the movie, he's an optometrist, and he thinks that he's going to write a paper, he has to send this paper off, which was a thing that my dad was doing, even though we knew that there was the paper was not complete and he wasn't addressing it right and that kind of thing. But my dad had gone from being obsessed with music in real life and obsessed with, the things that he taught and he's a big reader and to just all day photographing the critters outside the panoramic window out the back, or his collection of coins, or taking apart things that he couldn't put back together again. His interests kind of changed, and he didn't seem troubled by the loss of memory or interest in the past at all. Mm-hmm. If Gordon's contrasted with Gordon, who's is still lucid and totally fine, really. I thought it was an interesting thing. If your parent is going through something that you're afraid, you see that coming in your life, possibly you're given this incident happens, and it makes you think that maybe this is going to happen. This is your future, and your brain is your most prized thing. What do you do? Right. So some of the ways in which that came about.
Okay. What else we have, Agam? What else is a good question? That was a good question.
We have another question from Luan Art. Would this movie ring true in a different setting, a different socioeconomic group, or a different ethnicity?
I don't know if I could really. I don't think I can. Maybe. I don't.
Well,
these are. I was writing something that was close, not close to my own experience, but involving some of my own experience, and I'm in the ethnic group that I'm in.
Right.
So I hope that it resonates. I know that a lot of people that I've spoken to can connect with caring for elderly parents. This is something I see so many people going through. The rest of it, I don't. I mean, hope.
It seems like you're dealing with some sort of universal stuff here. The people taking care of old folks in their families is, that's a thing, obviously. But dissolution of marriage and infidelity, all those things happen irrespective of your socioeconomic or racial background, right? I think the thing that makes the movie so specific, of course, is that you're in this idyllic place, that you are in this, you're in the Hamptons when you're shooting it. And so it feels like you're in a place that doesn't even really exist anymore. Small town America, with all these different things. But then in the grief seminars, or the grief, grief group, you've got people from different racial backgrounds. They're all going through stuff as well. And so it's almost like you can imagine, well, if she's going through this terrible grief, what's her grief like, and her grief like, and his grief like? So to me, I think these are universal stories that you're telling.
Yeah.
Grief sadly is universal, right? Trauma and grief are not the provenance of any one group, sadly enough.
Yeah.
But particularly the memory loss stuff, I know in my own family, it's touched grandparents and parents and cousins and aunts and uncles. It doesn't discriminate, unfortunately.
It's true. It's true.
What else do we have, sir?
All right, this question comes in from Carolyn. She wants to know how your collaboration was with the screenwriter, and did you work together or did you write separately, and what was the process?
It was so kind of organic. Is that the word? I mean, we're old friends, and we had talked about doing something together over the years. And so, when we, I always like to say he did the heavy lifting. As I was saying earlier, he took the book apart, wrote down all the scenes, wrote down all the characters, got that all cross-referenced. And then we sat down together and we're like, okay, what can we use? What do we have to get rid of? Da, da, da. And once we had a list of scenes that we were going to actually use, then we just sat down and wrote, and we would write in our own houses, and then we would trade at the end of the day, and then we had a script.
And so you'd actually do it at the end of each day that you were working on it?
Pretty much. Like I'd write a short scene every day. Yeah, I was working on History of Great Things in the morning, and in the afternoon I would write a scene in the movie.
So that's interesting. So like when I collaborated with Brad Meltzer on that book right there, it'd be weeks sometimes before we'd go back and forth with each other, because I would write 25 pages and then he'd edit those 25 pages and he'd write 10 pages and I'd edit his 10 pages and write 15 pages.
It seems so different though, collaborating on a book. I mean, I have done that too now with my friend because we wrote a middle grade book, and that was super fun too, but different.
And so did you have to learn how to fight though? Because that was, for me, that was the thing that I think for Brad and I, when we were doing that book right there, is like we had to learn how to disagree with each other without like getting mad about not saying it.
So
you know what I mean?
Yes, we didn't fight. Neither of us are fighters. I think that was obvious, but we did. There's sort of two components to that. One is that Donnie said to me, like, don't ever feel bad about telling me that, you're not crazy about something that I send you. Mm-hmm. And I went into it trying not to be precious about my stuff, because I was so happy to be doing it. We did it without, we wrote the script without knowing that anybody was going to buy it.
Right.
But yes, we did. Speaking to that, the time thing, it just happened that we both had the time to do it. It was over a summer, I think, for whatever reason.
And so who got final say?
Well, I mean, I think I would say he did.
Because he's also the director, so.
Yeah, but it was not ever, there isn't anything that I felt like,
no more Gene Triplehorn.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, Agam, we got time for 2 more questions.
All right, I have.
Make them good ones.
I've got one from Ann Silva.
Hi, Ann Silva.
Alum. She says, Betsy, I love this movie so much. Was it weird to be in your own movie? And
yes.
Do you have any acting experience?
Well, I mean, that really depends on what you want to call acting experience. But I have dabbled in that arena.
A little summer stock.
No summer stock, but just a little of this and a little of that, and but not, no, I'm not an actress.
So viewers,
I've taken acting classes and realized that I was not an actress.
I have to tell you, viewers, I've seen headshots of Elizabeth Crane. So at some point in her life, she thought of herself as someone who would be an actor.
I auditioned for a soap opera, and then I got a second audition for that soap opera, which I thought was a huge deal. And then I didn't get it, and then I got dropped by my manager, and I was like 24, and I was just like, well, that's it then.
If I can't be on Ryan's Hope, then it's nothing for me.
It was Ryan's. I think it was Ryan's Hope. I think it was Ryan's Hope.
Oh, well, it's good.
Yeah.
And so was it strange being in your own movie, or did you enjoy it?
Very strange.
A dog has walked
Completely uncomfortable. Yes, deeply uncomfortable.
And who's the
But I did learn how to do my hair on that movie.
Who's the new dog in your life?
This is Cody. He's wondering why we're not both in bed right now. He's very cute, but he likes barking. Hello, buddy. Hello.
Well, Cody, and you can go to bed after one more question. Agam, send Betsy to bed with a good one.
Let's see here. Betsy, I love your cardigans. That's the final question.
That's not a question. A question is usually hallmarked with a question mark.
I think we went through all of them.
All right.
We answered all of them.
You got all the good ones. Well, Elizabeth Crane, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Me, Todd. It was fun.
We Only Know So Much is Elizabeth Crane's book. You can order it right now from all of the normal booksellers that you like to go to. I've been using bookshop.org a lot lately. It's been faster than Amazon if you guys are looking for a good place to get some books right now. And of course, the movie We Only Know So Much is streaming everywhere. So if you're just watching this for the first time and haven't seen the movie, you can see it anywhere you'd like. Thank you to all of you that came and watched us. We're going to do a bunch more programming all summer long. So look in your email for that. And stay safe out there. Wear your mask. Don't go out, no matter what the county supervisor says. We'll see you next time, everybody.
Thanks for coming, everybody, and asking good questions.
Bye, everybody.
Good night, Todd.
Good night, Betsy.